Hey, Global 2 students, Mr. G here. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you guys about this Unit 9 packet that you guys got this week, focusing specifically on completing that Week 8 assignment that's going to be due on Sunday. And what I thought I would do with you guys is basically just kind of give you a quick review of some of the bigger topics that are covered in Unit 9. And what you'll notice is I'm going to sort of be covering them the way that they are, or the order that they're in your note packet. But that also ends up being the same order that they're in as you guys are answering your questions on the Week 8 assignment. So what I would do if I was you guys is kind of get this video playing. You could either have this on your phone while you guys are on your computers, kind of working and typing in some of this information as you hear it and get some answers. Or you guys could always be playing it on a tab in YouTube and have it sort of playing in the background on your computer as you guys are looking at the assignment or the note packet. So get yourself set up now for the best way to complete this to make sure that you guys get credit for this assignment, okay? Now, like I said, I'm not going to go over the actual assignment with you guys. I'm not going to go over the specific questions with you guys. But what I am going to do is I'm going to open up the note packet here. There it is. All right, and I'm just going to kind of walk you guys through some of the bigger topics, giving you my explanation of these things. And then you can use that information to hopefully make the questions a little bit easier on your Week 8 assignment. So what you notice when you opened up that Unit 9 packet, the first thing that's talked about there is this theme in global studies, referred to as globalization. Now, globalization is a more recent topic in global studies because basically since the start of the 20th century, we have entered into what is sort of commonly referred to as a global economy. And what they mean by that is, in more modern times, countries are more interconnected than ever before. We rely on many different countries for goods and raw materials and natural resources in the same way that many other countries rely on us for goods and products and natural resources. So what it creates is something called globalization, which is basically just this interconnection of countries through trade, which obviously leads to more cultural exchanges and more cultural diffusion and all those kinds of things. Okay, so globalization is this idea that countries are now in a situation where we all rely on each other for things that we need. All right, so globalization was sort of the first topic being covered here. And in your note packet, it went through different examples of globalization and why it started to happen more, including things like improved technology, improved logistics, and transportation and movement of goods and all those kinds of things. All right, but the next big topic that appears in your note packet is actually these world organizations. Now, your assignment doesn't really have any specific questions about these world organizations, but what would have probably appeared on your Regents exam is at least a question or two referring to some of the more famous world organizations that currently exist and oftentimes are connected with globalization. We have something called like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is connected closely with the United Nations. The goal of the IMF is to improve economic activity between countries, more trade. We have organizations like the World Trade Organization, which is pretty clear what that would do. World Trade Organization. The goal of the organization is to make world trade more efficient and easier for countries so that more countries can benefit from it. So we have all these different organizations that have been formed with the goal of reducing trade barriers and restrictions and ultimately making trade easier so that more countries can benefit from it. Okay, so this is sort of the concept of globalization. That should help you guys out with those first question or two in your assignment. Now, the next part of your assignment seems to focus more on the concept of population growth. And you guys know from Unit 8, we already talked about urbanization and how there's certain areas of our world that are experiencing massive, massive population shifts, so movement of people, but also massive population growth. China is probably the country that most people think of when they think of population growth. But of course, there's other countries that are experiencing this too. India, for example, is having massive, massive population growth. And in fact, some people predict that India will surpass China somewhere probably in the next 10 years as the most populated country in the world. And there's a whole diagram in your note packet that basically takes you through the issues that India is having with this massive population growth and shifts in population. But then in your assignment, it asks you to kind of take a look at the graph, and there's a video clip, and there's long reading passage about population and overpopulation. And population and overpopulation, the concept behind population growth and why it's happening now, there's actually multiple reasons for it. You need to think back to the Industrial Revolution, and you guys remember that during the Industrial Revolution, while working class people were suffering in factories, and there were issues with spread of diseases in overpopulated cities and those types of things, don't forget that the Industrial Revolution, in a broader sense, did improve the standard of living for people. And one of the ways that the standard of living improved was by advances in medical technology. It's also at this time people started eating better. And we've seen that throughout the course of the last 200 years or so, is that people's diets have improved with greater access to better foods and healthier foods. So when we talk about the reasons for population growth and overpopulation, of course you're talking about the natural birth rate. More people exist, more people are having more children, and that is leading to population growth. But the other thing that we're also seeing at this time is what is known as a decline in the death rate. Basically, people are living longer than ever before. Think about it. During the Industrial Revolution, the average person may have lived till the age of 45. But now it's not uncommon to see our grandparents and great-grandparents even living into maybe their 80s or even their 90s. So as people tend to live much longer lives than they used to, we see that there's older people, right? A higher amount of older people continuing to live while getting more and more people added in from childbirth. So more babies being added into the population in addition to these larger and increased number of older people, okay? And again, it's different reasons for that. The better foods and diets, the better medical technology and healthcare systems that we have. And again, the natural birth rate increasing, and the fact that people are living longer, the declining death rate, okay? So there's lots and lots of different reasons for overpopulation. Now, of course, overpopulation can lead to some major issues. And the next thing that you guys are supposed to do in your notes is you guys are supposed to look at not only some of the problems that are happening from overpopulation, but some of the ways that countries are trying to deal with problems in overpopulation. So the next topic that popped up was something referred to as China's one-child policy. Now, China's one-child policy was first sort of created right around like the late 1970s, early 1980s. And you guys have probably heard of this before. The concept that the Chinese government came out with is they basically said they were having such an issue with overpopulation that they made it a law that parents could only have one child. So they were limiting Chinese families to only having one baby. And they thought that ultimately this would lead to a slowing of that population growth. But what ultimately ended up happening was this ended up leading to a variety of other problems. In Chinese culture, what they found is that most families wanted to have boys and not girls. So families that only were allowed to have one child, if they had a girl, oftentimes what they would try to do is give that daughter up for adoption so that they could have a second chance at having a son. There are even these terrible stories of women, abandoning their daughters, leaving them for dead essentially in the woods and places like that, pretending as if they never had that child so that they could get that second opportunity at having a boy. Basically, what China found is that they had this huge amount of increase in daughters being given up for adoption, this overabundance of children in orphanages. So it created a whole bunch of issues. So one of the things to keep in mind with China's one-child policy is that they have adapted it since it was initially created. And China is still pushing its people to have very small families. But you can have more than one child. What they ultimately decided is that if you do want to have more than one child, you just pay more for it in taxes. So you have to ultimately pay the government, sort of a penalty for having a larger family. It's the opposite of what we have here in the United States, where our government gives us larger tax breaks the more children that we have. China's the opposite. They actually tax you more as a penalty for having more children. But China's not the only country that tries to create these situations where the government can control population growth. There's some terrible stories from like the southern portion of Asia and some of the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and those types of places where there's these rumors of forced sterilization, where they're actually forcing young girls to have surgery so that they can no longer have children, that they never have the option at that. In India, one of the things that their government tried to do, or at least maybe experimented with, was the idea of paying people to not have children right away after getting married. So what they would do is they would offer an incentive. If you were a young Indian couple that just got married, the government would say to you, hey, if you wait 7 years to have children, we will pay you X amount of dollars each year that you don't have kids, basically pushing back the time that they wait to have kids. And ultimately, it would shorten the amount of available time that they ultimately have to actually have those children, hopefully creating smaller families. All right, so governments have experimented recently with trying to come up with sort of creative ways to slow down this population growth. Okay, but the population growth again has created a variety of issues. Some of those issues are obviously very closely related to our environment, and as more and more humans are on this earth, we are going to have issues, or more and more issues, with pollution and land use and those types of things. So there are a variety of environmental issues that would have been asked about on the Regents exam, many of which you guys probably already know from science class. So if you're talking about environmental issues connected with population growth, you can focus on a bunch of them. Maybe you've heard of something called deforestation. Deforestation. Basically, we're cutting down our rainforests. And you guys know that trees provide oxygen for us to breathe. It helps to maintain the world around us. But what people are doing is because they want more land for populations to move into, but also to clear land for farming to produce more food for the growing population. They're cutting down these rainforests, creating these massive problems in some of these areas where we have these beautiful forests that create oxygen for us, places like the Amazon rainforest in South America, places like the Congo rainforest in sub-Saharan Africa. These are places that are being destroyed because of population pressures. Maybe desertification is another environmental issue. Desertification is this concept that the world's deserts are currently expanding. They're getting bigger. And as deserts expand, of course, useful arable land is being gobbled up. The reason, though, that this desertification, the expanding deserts, is taking place is because of, number one, drought, all right? But we are to blame as well. It's overuse of land. We are overusing the land that we have access to. We are draining the land of its minerals and resources when we over-farm it. The other thing that's happening is that a lot of people who are farmers or raise livestock are allowing their farm animals to graze on the land, eating all the vegetation that exists in these areas. And when the vegetation is gone, all the grass and all the plants is gone, all that's left behind is this dirt. And it's exposed to the elements and it dries out and ultimately becomes desert-like, that it's not useful anymore. Okay, so desertification is another environmental issue directly connected to population growth, but probably the biggest one, and the one that you guys are most familiar with because it's on the news all the time, is climate change and global warming. right? Climate change and global warming, it's directly connected to us and our population and what we are doing to our planet, all right? When you talk about global warming and climate change, what you're really talking about is something known as greenhouse gases. As humans, we pollute. It is something that we seem to be really, really good at, is burning of fossil fuels. And we burn these fossil fuels, and the air pollution that comes out of these factories and out of these automobiles goes into the air. And what it does is it builds up in our atmosphere and it traps these greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And trapping that heat in our atmosphere is dangerous to all living organisms on the planet. But it's dangerous to the planet itself. And again, the whole concept of global warming and climate change is we are essentially throwing off the balance in our world, creating these situations where polar ice caps are melting, and we're having these strange weather events, drastic increases in the number of hurricanes and tornadoes and all those kinds of things that are happening in our world. And again, it's directly connected to pollution. And where does pollution come from? It comes from us. The more people there are on the planet polluting, the more this becomes a problem. Countries have tried to come up with international solutions to try to deal with this. There's a very famous document called the Kyoto Protocol. It came out of Japan not all that long ago, where countries tried to come together to come up with a way to agree on trying to reduce those numbers of greenhouse gases by reducing the number of fossil fuels being used. But the problem with international cooperation, as we sometimes know, is that countries aren't willing to cooperate, and countries didn't all agree to this. And the problem with something like climate change and global warming is if one or two countries do it, it's not going to make a difference. What you need is the whole international community to come together and work together on this, and that's where the problem lies. All right, one more topic that appeared right at the end of the note packet that you guys are asked about in your assignment. And I'm just going to kind of give you my quick version of the story, and you can use it however you want to answer those questions, and use the documents in your note packets to kind of fill in the blanks. But there's this famous event that takes place through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and it's known as the Green Revolution. And the reason they call it green is not because of money. Green has to do with plant life. It has to do with food. And basically the story goes like this. After World War II, right, after 1945, we see a drastic increase in the population. A baby boom took place here in the United States, for example. And political scientists and historians and these people got together and they started taking a look at the world's population. And what they noticed is that the world's population was increasing faster than the food supply. All right, and we were getting to a point where our population was going to be so much higher than the amount of food available that it would have led to a massive worldwide famine. And that's what was predicted in the early 1950s, was a massive worldwide famine where millions and millions of people were going to starve to death. More specifically in developing areas of the world, places like Mexico and places like India, for example. So what happened is a bunch of scientists, engineers, and farmers got together and basically said, we need to change the way that food is produced. We need to change our farming techniques. That's what the Green Revolution is. It is a change in farming techniques and technology. Changes in farming techniques and technology. And basically what they came up with was better farming tools and instruments, but also different types of farming techniques. And the goal is obvious, to produce more food. Because if we can produce more food to meet the growing population, then you can prevent that worldwide famine from ever happening. And there is good news. It did work. There was a massive increase in food production. That worldwide famine that was predicted never took place. But there's also a downside to this. A lot of the farming techniques that we used and some of the new technology that was used, we have come to find out may be very harmful to our environment. For example, they decided during the Green Revolution that it was a good idea to use certain chemicals on plants, pesticides and those types of things, to protect plants from being eaten by different animals or insects. And what they found is that these chemicals that were sprayed onto plants to protect them can oftentimes be dangerous to humans in consuming them, but have also polluted the water sources around this farmland, polluted rivers and streams and those types of things. Another example of chemicals being used in food is in livestock, right? Growth hormones and steroids were injected into animals to make these giant cows and giant chickens that produced more food, which is good. People need more food. But the problem is these hormones and steroids that have been injected into these farm animals have found to potentially be dangerous to humans. And that's why that whole organic food movement has really sort of taken off in the last like 5-6 years, is because people want to eat organic. They want to eat food that has not been injected with these growth hormones and steroids or sprayed with these chemicals. So there's sort of a positive and negative to the green revolution. Some people look at it as a huge positive because they say, well, it increased food production so that world starvation never happened, and that's a positive. But of course, there's also this side where people say, well, wait a minute, I know we did that, and that's good, but at what expense? Did we destroy our environment to make that happen? Did we make food more dangerous for people to consume by injecting and spraying these types of things on our food? So the Green Revolution is somewhat of a controversial event in history because of how you want to look at it. But that ended up being the last topic of your Unit 9. I hope that this video, although maybe a little bit long, helped you out. If you guys have been struggling with kind of digging through the note packets on your own and pulling out this information, maybe hearing it from a teacher might sort of help it to settle in and fill in some of the blanks for you guys. All right, I hope that helped. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact your teachers, ask those things. Remember, this week 8 assignment is due on Sunday. Please try to keep up with your assignments. Incompletes in the fourth quarter are going to put you in a really, really bad spot. You got to make sure that you are doing enough work to get that passing grade in the fourth quarter to get your course credit and your Regents credit. So you guys are in a good spot to do that as long as you are doing the work. So keep up on those things, okay? All the best to you guys and your families. And again, contact if you have any questions or need anything from us. We'll see you soon.